This is Kenya's the number one opera in the world, according to Thorin. You're watching Thorin channel, that are also known as the number one existence fan in the world.
Right, this is going to be episode 63 of Counterpoints. Me and Moses, as usual. You know what's great, Moses, is like, when we do those episodes, you know, on the intro to the last one, I was like, just trying to basically just be obnoxious to all the people who are like, come on the show, and people like it's what if you ever. I always say this to rookie journalists, right? If you ever do that move at the beginning of the interview where you're like, you need no introduction, but if you could go ahead and tell our fans who you are, it's like if you do that, that actually means you're doing a bad job as an interviewer, because basically, if everyone does know who he is, then why bother introducing him? Like, why would you introduce Taz, you know? Or, if people do not quite know who he is, you should introduce him. Like, oh, he's from this team, and, you know, he's accomplished this. Like, it's actually kind of like whack when you ask him to do that. But it is also the case that some of these people are completely fucking unknown. So, to be fair, when you set things up like that, it's like... here's the thing. I'm just going to go cards on the table. I don't actually remember what team you were involved with, wLe. So you're from the Australian scene. Was it actually Immunity? Was it? I know it wasn't Renegades. So which Australian team were you working with?
So I've had a pretty sort of just sporadic career, but most recently and the most notably, I coached Chiefs when they're at IEM Sydney 2017, where we beat North.
Right. So this is when they were the number 2 team or whatever, when it was like the battle after Renegades left, right? Yeah, look at that.
And we smashed Renegades at that comp too.
I mean, I just mainly remember because I reached out to you as part of a shadowy behind-the-scenes conspiracy to destroy Chad's career. Just a joke for everyone within the community there. Because, but, you know, again, I'll just leave that on there. Don't touch that, anyone. Just let that one float by. Think that's a bit of a weird thing to say, Thorin. It is, isn't it? That is a bit of a weird thing to say. But you know what? It's all fun and games now, and that's all that matters. We've all moved on. Exactly. We are now, well, the irony is, Moses, that is like one of the most applicable moments to use that, because obviously we weren't mates at the time, but now we are all mates, because I always tell everyone, I tell them this, listen, the reason why it's going to be great when you guys are on the desk anymore is now there's no reason to hate me. I'm not flaming how shit you guys are in the game anymore, right? Now you can just sit there. You can also just say a bunch of nonsense. You get paid just as much as I do, and we're all in the final. Win-win for everyone. Right? It's like that's what you know. What that's what no one mentions, by the way, Moses. Aside from so in your case, or Lurpus or Natu, like you guys are retired fully. You know, you've had your Counter-Strike careers. The rest of the people on the desk, you know, when people flame me like, oh, they're all pros and it's just Thorin. It's like, whoa. You're right. I was never a pro in any context. But can I just go ahead and point out that all the people next to me are all failed pros. Like they are. You know, listen, I'm just going to call a spade. Like they are all people who basically weren't any good anymore and did exactly what I just mentioned. One day they like sat down, did one of those gifs where it's like all mathematical symbols, and they were like, wait a minute, why the fuck am I still playing? Like, why don't I just go beyond that desk? Like, this is way better.
We're just the first ones to realize it's the better turn. Go onto the desk.
It actually is, though, because think about it, right? Even in terms of your rep, if you can only go off what you do in game, you actually could, for example, like I mean, MSL's probably the best example ever. You could actually be a good in-game leader, but if the results are bad, a pleb's just going to go, oh shit, actually, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But like, so when Chad's Renegades was losing all the time, obviously that's what people used to do. They used to just flame the fuck out of him. But everyone loves him now that he's on the desk, because you get to actually show your game knowledge. You aren't restricted by whatever players you play with. But anyway, long, circuitous way all around of saying we're going to start this episode now. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the much vaunted major preview. But because unlike almost everyone else in the fucking esports scene, I'm actually someone who's seen a few of these tournaments before and has thought about podcasts. And we're not going to do, here are the matchups for round 1. We're not going to go super in depth of like, oh, and who will overall be the teams to make it through. It's like, that stuff's like vaguely interesting by the by if you have a key point on it. But personally, I actually think the most interesting preview is you take the field. So in this case, we're going to start with this new challenger stage, and you look at just who the teams are. And then you consider, what form are they in? Have they got like roster moves recently? Like, what would it mean if the teams made it through? These are, to me, more interesting questions and things to discuss than, like, for example, like, will Fnatic beat Vici Gaming? It's like, even if we give you 20 minutes of straight fight, even if I have every stat right now of the map veto, like, no one's really going to care about that. So we're going to talk about things we actually care about. Radical thought, I know. Because there's a lot of podcasts I've noticed out there in
weird,
sports. They're still trying to learn these things, you know. Like my favourites when I'll just go ahead and flame people who do this. Like, if you are a rookie at doing content, Moses, it actually is a good idea to structure things, you know, and have like a sense of like, oh, here's what I might talk about later in the show, etc. But what people don't seem to realise is, like, that eventually limits how good the discussion can be if you're not a rookie. Like, if you make it so you have to talk after this particular topic about, you know, the next team's going to be this team. It's like, well, how could we possibly know? Like, we might have some amazing discussion about that first team that we would have gone down this totally cool rabbit hole over here. So anyway, let's start in similar fashion. So what we'll do is this. wLe, pick one of the teams in the new Challenger stage that you would like to talk about. Like, you, for whatever reason, as I said, it could be something the lineup. Could be you think they'll do well, they'll do badly. They're just a curious team. Who would you pick out of these teams to start us off?
Actually, I think Cloud9's the most interesting team going into the new Challenger stage. Just based off how we saw they did like surprisingly well at iBuyPower, and when you look at the players and like the sort of situation that they've been basically making the best of the worst situation possible for God knows how long now, like hanging on by their fingernails. And yeah, it's really surprising that they've managed to actually make, like, I have no idea how they're going to perform going into the major, like especially with Zelsis playing. You know, he's just, because he wasn't really on anyone's radar in the North American scene, it seemed like. And now he's going to his first major. So yeah, it's going to be interesting for sure, and yeah, it's really hard to predict how they're going to play and how well they're going to do.
Because you know, Moses, actually, this is a topic I want to get your thoughts on. Because even though, I mean, if you think actually, if you're being fair, they've basically done the same kind of surprise performance with both the recent lineups. So they had Refresh at Blast at the end of last year, and then obviously they only did it E-League most recently when they had Zelsis coming in and they got Flusher and Kilo and everyone else in the lineup. Well, the bizarre thing about it is, in both scenarios, I actually think anyone who might have said before that tournament, this team will do nothing, you know, it's not a real lineup, like, you know, don't expect too much, that would be totally fair. And then when you see them in the game, it'd also be fair. Like, I don't blame the people, for example, who probably overhyped them because of the E-League result, because they actually could have won that E-League tournament, bizarrely. Yeah. Like, to me, this basically just reminds me of one of those like honeymoon type scenarios, except it's obviously the honeymoon that's not actually ever going to last. Like, you don't even yourself intend to use this lineup. But sometimes when you put in a sub or you run a scenario like this, where like in this particular scenario, you know you haven't got your real in-game leader. So you know, like, whatever I do now, it's not a long-term approach. You know, I'm just doing this for the next month. And you even have that mentality of like, oh, you know, expectations shouldn't be too ridiculous with this lineup because, you know, as long as we all play decently and then we get this guy back, we can do it. Like as a result, I would agree as well. I think it's actually the hardest team to predict because I have to say, I probably, if I'd have been on the desk for any of those games at those two tournaments, I would have had that feeling of like, yeah, they can't keep getting away with this for very much longer, you know, like they're going to drop next or they're going to drop next. Yeah, as I just said there, yeah, you're right. Basically, if Guardian hadn't gone ham on that train game, they almost certainly would have won that tournament. Like, they played well enough to win it, certainly. What do you think, Moses?
I think there's a lot of people sleeping on this Cloud9 team. I think they are going to be very, not even like sneaky at this point. I think if teams go into these major and like this challenger stage, this new challenger stage, and they're underestimating Cloud9, they're going to be in for a rude awakening. I think this team is going to blast through. They're probably going to be 3-0, maybe 3-1 on the challenger stage. I think this Cloud9 team actually has a decent chance of making top 8 at this major. And I think a lot of the reason why people are kind of quiet on them is because there is still confusion of like, oh, what the fuck are Flush and Kiyoshima doing on this roster? You know, who is this Zelsis guy? When is Golden coming back? I don't think Golden's coming back. I think this team at this point, they've done too good with stand-ins where they were struggling beforehand. They did too good with Refresh. Now they're still having results with Zelsis.
Oh, right. You actually think that they will just basically, you know, ride this out, do the next tournaments, and then it'll be a soft way to just transition into this being the real lineup if it's good enough.
Yep. Well, the big question mark on that is obviously going to be Flusha. Does he actually want an in-game lead?
Yes.
Maybe this is something where after the major, if Zelsis doesn't, like, you have to imagine Zelsis is still playing for a permanent contract and a permanent spot on this team. So there's still that flexibility where I think they could rotate away and go get an actual in-game leader of some sort. into this lineup. Kerrigan could be interesting. But the question for me still, I mean, the one worry I have about this lineup moving forward, it's going to be there for a while. There's no way to really solve this. Is how long do Flusha and Kiyoshima want to stay based out of North America?
Yes.
But if they stay in this team, I think there's some Automatic, I think, is going to become a very good AWPer. I think he's going to go down that same path of device where people at this upcoming major are going to be watching him play with the AWP and say he's very good with it. Like, he's actually surprised us with how talented he is with the AWP. How long is it going to last? And I think by the end of the year, we'll probably be talking about Automatic if he sticks with it as one of the most improved and one of the stronger AWPers in the scene. I think he certainly is already in North America. And Flush is playing back to a good level. Kiyoshima is playing at a good level. So this team is very strong. And I think they're going to surprise a lot of people through this major run. I think they're going to get top 8.
The thing is, actually, a point you make there is, the funny thing is, like, when I said it there, or, you know, it depends how well they'll do on the Zelsys angle. Actually, it is probably more pressing, like you alluded to there. The real issue is, when you have Kiyoshima and you have Flusha, who basically are only in this team because they didn't have many options. Yeah. This was one of the better ones in terms of like pay and, you know, like exposure level. And they're kind of trying to play to turn their careers around again, you know. So the problem is you basically have a window right now where either this team becomes world class, or these guys, if they play well, are just advertising themselves and they will end up in teams that aren't in NA. Like, you know, Kiyoshima will be on Mouse Sports, or Flusha will be on whichever Swedish team, you know, he wants to play for. Because the problem is, if they play as well as they have in the last few tournaments, they already look like they've sort of started to redeem their careers. That's probably the craziest thing about this team, is that it looked like, what's mad is, on paper, the roster always looked good. It's just that you looked at the lineup and you were like, except for Automatic, isn't everyone in this team sort of washed up? Like, you know, Kiyoshima and Flusha obviously haven't had any hype around them for the last year or so. Like, Kiyo hadn't played, and because barely did play when he was in Envious, because he just never qualified for anything. And then obviously Flusha was dropping off heavily individually. But I have to say, in this particular team, that's why I wonder what they themselves set as their expectation levels, because if they have actually recovered as players, that's very exciting. Oh, I think the point I was going to make was basically just that, because obviously the two most interesting players in the team in terms of the storyline, like you say, is Kiyoshima and Flusha. It's actually Automatic in terms of as a player, because as everyone noticed, I noticed with all the top 20 type lists, etc., people didn't notice because of how bad Cloud9 was that he actually had a pretty good year last year in, you know, the few games he got to play, because he went out tournaments so far. So the real interesting thing to me is, like, Kiyoshima being good doesn't surprise me at all, because as I've referenced every time we ever talk about him, he is not lacking team offers because of his ability. I mean, the reason why this guy's even been sat on the bench for so long is because of how he's maneuvered through the scene. And in fact, what's very bizarre about him as a person, as far as I know, I don't claim to know him as like a friend or anything, but the little things I do know about him behind the scenes is he actually also seems like someone who has a pretty decent amount of natural talent, because every time I've seen in his career, in the game he was playing bad, it was actually the periods where it seemed like he wasn't motivated, didn't do practice, etc. So every time I've actually seen that he's been on board for a project, the first LDLC Envious, obviously when he came to FaZe Clan, not immediately, it was when Kerrigan came. Like, he's had these periods where he's been a very good player. Even when he came to Envious again, actually, when they were terrible, he was actually probably the best player in the team. So him being good's not a surprise. I'm actually astounded that Flush has somehow managed to turn the corner, though. Like, this really looked, Moses, to me, like when Snacks joined Mouse Sports. It's like you want them to get, yeah, sure, you want to dream that they get it all back because they were such brilliant players. But in case of Snacks, you just kept having that feeling like, any minute now he's going to get, and it never did. What's amazing is Flusha and Cloud9, it didn't take very long, actually. I think he's been pretty legit so far.
No, and it's really cool to see, because he had that he was surprisingly open when he left Fnatic of saying, you know, I've had some real issues on this team with my motivation and like my emotional state. I was quick to be frustrated, quick to be annoyed when we're playing. So, I mean, he really did an amazing job of having like a full mental reset heading into Cloud9, and it's showing. And remember, he's in-game leading for this team, which is impressive, because he's gone through stretches in Fnatic where he'd done that, and every single time after like a month, he was like, yeah, this isn't for me. So now,
for people who don't know, he basically, this is actually why, if you notice, I give Nitro, even though I personally wouldn't put him as like top 3 leader in the world or whatever, the reason why I give him credit is he is now a real in-game leader, whereas obviously that was the classic thing he always used to do, is that he'd do like a month and a half of it and then he'd go, I don't want to do it anymore. Whereas, as you say, like Flush has been doing it the whole time, it looks pretty good. Right, what do you think? Go on.
Well, I just wanted to say the one big question mark I have is, I mean, one thing we should talk about is this Celsius guy, because we don't know a whole lot about him and everything. And I saw him play at iBuyPower, saw him play at eLeague, and he's not the kind of player that they've picked up that, like, if you haven't watched this lineup before, still the positives that I say about Celsius, and I think most people, you have to imagine them in the context, or not imagine, I mean, you just have to realize they're in the context of him being such a new player, and that grace period is probably going to run out after the major, right? You'd have to imagine, like, he's had 2 months, he's had this big event. So Celsius isn't going to blow your socks off with the way he plays. Most of what he's done for Cloud9 has been impact plays where he's excelled. Like, he's had a couple clutches, a couple good rotations, a couple important kills at the right moment. But they put a lot of faith in him. He's kind of like, he's a guy that they'll put on their own, and he has to start the fake for the team, or he has to create something for the team. And he's the guy where they really are putting him in kind of like the quote unquote bitch roles, where it's, hey, we're going to throw this flashbang, run around the smoke and try and get us 1 kill. It's an important job, but it's not like the most important job. But you just have to realize with Celsius, it's not going to be some kind of like, he's not going to be some young prodigy. He's very much a project for this Cloud9 team.
Sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Celsius has really surprised me as a player. Like, just watching them, like obviously, like you guys have said, Keo and Flusher are really surprising as players. Automatic on the AWP is amazing. Even Rush has had his moments here and there, which is because he was just so bad for so long. He just felt like because when he was in Optic, he was just amazing as an entry. And then I think he swapped roles or something, and he just sort of fell away. But he's had his moments again now, even. But yeah, Celsius is surprising to me because most new up and coming NA players are star players. We don't like Breezy and Ethan and like the players on Ghost and Wardell. Like, they're always AWPers, or they're like star riflers, or like big clutch players. But Celsius is just a solid player, and he doesn't seem to, and it's really surprising considering this is way bigger than what he was used to. Like, he was playing like online qualifiers and in online leagues and stuff. He didn't go to many LANs. He was very I think he was in Swole Patrol, right? That's what's really surprising to me, is he's playing these high pressure situations, but he's been given these like Moses sort of said, sort of, I guess, small roles, but they're vital they're integral to the strategy that Flush is trying to pull off. So and he's doing them well. That's what's really surprising. I feel like if that was any other up and coming star player, which is the norm in NA, most NA players coming up want to be the best player in the team. They wouldn't be able to do that. So that's really exciting to me, that there's actually to may possibly trigger Moses here, a support player on the rise in NA.
Yep, that one hurts. Noteworthy. Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing with Celsius is he does have one of the best attitudes that you can ask for in an inexperienced player. He is a very nice guy, very dedicated, we've all seen the clips of him being all wholesome on Reddit and all that good stuff, but that's only going to take you so far. And like I said, that grace period of being able to put the context of, holy hell, he's very inexperienced, he's still a rookie, after the major, I think that's when people are going to start looking at this and saying, all right, we need to see some kind of an improvement over time, right? So he's got the major. It's going to be an interesting experience. I think iBuyPower was his first event competing on a stage of any kind in front of an audience of that size.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's really, between that and then going to Turner Studios and TBS and everything like that, and then going to legendary Spodek Arena for Counter-Strike and the major, he's getting a crash course in, having to keep your nerve and having to play under high pressure situations. So we'll see after the major. After that is when I'm personally going to be looking to see some kind of step up in his, round by round, not just looking for impact. I think it's great that he's able to find impact at the moment, but he's going to have to do more by the time the major's over.
Right.
Yeah, pretty sad.
Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say, I'm pretty sad there's no Celsius stickers because he's the coach for Cloud9.
It is a
Well,
bit of a
then don't abuse the fucking rules, you little cunts. That's one thing I've got to say, by the way. This is completely stupid. Is this is an example of where, that is the rule. They're not. Technically, the rule is allowed to do that. It was always allowed to do it. Obviously, it literally was done that way by Astralis a few years ago. It's just that the problem is even though it solves a problem we did have in the scene where, yeah, no one wants it to be that if you lose a player right before the major, your major's just busted because, like, you know, your real coach has to play. And then, as you've seen in almost every single instance, in fact, the Zonic one's actually the closest anyone ever came to making it work because they still made top 8. And actually, if anyone remembers, they almost made top 4 that tournament. It was actually a pretty insane run. So that's not going to happen for most teams. So even though I get that teams are happy there's a way to get around this problem so you can still have a proper player, it does make it a bit silly when you do that kind of an angle, because especially because the part that I don't understand about it is, like, the big one's the most egregious example because they have 2 coaches in their team and neither's obviously listed. So it's like, come on, don't be unreasonable.
Yeah, I mean, it's a stupid rule, but I mean, Valve has given it the green light. Like, I think what was it? I think Valve said it in an interview that Valve, or someone on Cloud9 said in an interview that Valve cleared it. So I mean, if Valve are just don't care that people are using it as a technicality or anything like that, then whatever. I mean,
well, it's like Big are doing the same thing with Nex, right? Or they were planning to, I think, possibly.
Yeah, I don't know the big situation, but I mean, you have to imagine that they went to Valve or ESL and cleared it and just said, listen, this is what we're going to do. Like, you know, Golden can't travel. He's still, you know, not cleared for that, for safety, for health reasons. So we have to list Celsius as our coach and we're just going to be using him. And they're like, yep, that's fine.
But the thing is, for one of the teams like this, I'm not going to bother asking if they're going to make it to the next round, because if you actually look at the amount of teams in the new Challengers stage, it's not that crazy stacked, to be honest. Like, there's so many sort of names that are like underdog names, or they're just mixed bag names, that I actually think it's only worth asking about those teams when you talk about those teams. Like, it's like if you talk about like Vegas squad or something, there you can talk about if they're going to make it. There's not really any reason to predict against Cloud9 generally if you look at the last 2 tournaments and you look at this field. So if we move on to another team, right, I'll pick one now. So I think an interesting team for me is Ninjas in Pajamas, because I actually feel like this team is there's a state that I always describe that teams can get caught in, where I call it no man's land. And I actually took this concept from Moses will get this reference. You know, in the 2000s, there was a team that the Atlanta Hawks had, where they had like Joe Johnson and Josh Smith, and they had this team where it was like, what they had was, it was kind of like NRG. They had like a bunch of players who, none of them were going to be the best player in the NBA, but they had a bunch of players who were like all-star players. And because you had a bunch of them, you know, you don't need one to carry the game every time, but collectively, you know, they're going to make you a good team. And the problem they had was, for maybe like 3 or 4 years in a row, they would make the playoffs every time, you know, with a decent record. Like, they'd be the team that I'd have like, you know, let's say the 5th seed in the Eastern Conference in the NBA. And so they'd win their first round matchup as they're expected to. They'd go to the second round. They'd lose in the second round to whoever they played there, because, I mean, logically, they're the 5th seed. That's actually what you're supposed to lose, logically, if you're the 5th seed. And their problem was, next year, they do what all teams do who get a bit of success and improve, is you're looking at it from your perspective of like, well, I used to be bad and now I'm good. So you think, right, well, you know what, that's good that I actually came to the second round. You know, we've improved, we've got some experience. Next year is when we're going to make the conference finals, and, you know, we're going to do what we did, but a little bit better. And basically, they just ran out their window doing exactly that. Like, they were as I said, they were, you know, maybe like this 8th best team in the NBA, but they never went anywhere super far, and they never did badly. That's the problem. Because they never did badly, and they never like failed to make the playoffs, so they never like went out in the first round immediately. In this particular period I'm talking about, they didn't make any big move. They didn't gamble. They just thought, we've got a good team, let's see how it goes. So the problem is, the reason I'm bringing up this analogy is I've noticed with NIP that there's a lot of, you can tell the people who've only watched like the marquee matchups for the last few months and the people who've watched like every game of some teams. Because I think NIP are the ultimate fool's gold team in the current CSGO scene, because since they were so underwhelming back when they were like failing the major, no one even knew if they'd make it to the last major, but then that was where it all turned around. You know, they made that run, they won the minor, then they came in and they were solid at like DreamHack, whatever it was, Stockholm, yeah, and then they went to the major, and obviously that everyone remembers that, you know, they were actually one of the teams that was a bit hard done by, like they had a lot of hard opponents, and then they just missed the legend spot. So when you look at all that, and then later on in the year, you know, they're going head to head with Astralis, and they have that Blast Pro Series where they did pretty decent. If you only look at the high points, you could get so excited, like I was saying about that Atlanta Hawks team, like, hey, this looks fucking good. Like, they've turned it around. Like, everything's looking pretty nice, actually. The in-game leader scenario is not affecting them too much. Like, the skill level's pretty good. Obviously, one of the things that made them, I think, uniquely able to match up with Astralis is they didn't seem to get phased or rattled if they were playing a better team because they had so many veterans, you know, that have played for that many years. But the downside is this, is if you actually watched a lot of their games and some of the tournaments where they didn't do well, the ceiling on the team is good, but the basement's pretty bad as well. Like they also can definitely not be a top 10 team on some days. So this is why I say, for me, I'm very interested in this team for this major, because they've now had that lineup quite a while. Like, people forget, if you've had a lineup more than about 6 months, you've tried most things, you know, you've figured out what spots people are going to play, what maps we're going to play. That's why, actually, if you notice, the trend in the last few years is if you don't want to kick a player, that's why you kick the coach, because it sort of resets you for a few months. Like, oh, well, we've got a new coach, so we've got to work on things. It's like a way to get a few extra months out of a lineup. I think, for me, this Ninjas in Pajamas team, they're basically at a make or break point, because their best parts, the ceiling that they had, looked like they could have been like a very nice team. Like, maybe, like, I would have said, like, they could have been like the 5th best team in the world or something, you know. And hey, if they get the right run, maybe they could win a tournament. But when I see the flaw that they have, the basement, as it were, if they do badly at this major, I think eventually they have to change something in their team. Like, you've had it for a long time now. So what do you think, wLe? What do you think of NIP?
Yeah, I really want to echo your sentiments there. Like, I think that the sort of like Fool's Gold is really accurate. I think, like, with NIP for such a long time now, it's always, for me, like, the key factor has always been Forest, and like, it's like undeniable that he is one of the best players that's ever played any version of Counter-Strike, I think. But at the same time, he is so inconsistent. Like, he just has periods where he's just not himself. And like, that's what's so surprising to me, is that people love them so much and like are such huge fans of theirs.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, that's actually probably a key point to connect to that, which is that's why that phenomenon exists. It's like, because everyone really wants them to be good. I think people just fondly remember the moments they do awesome, and then it's like it's like, this is the problem with any team that's got a classic core, like Virtus Pro, obviously. Until they properly hit a massive slump for a long time, what you do is when they have the bad tournament, you just scrub that from your mind and go, they'll get it back for the next one. Then when they have the great one, they're back again. Like, that's why all you need to know about this is, right, everyone out there, so I'm mainly just talking about people like Lurpus who do this, like, everyone out there who any of you who do a tweet that goes, see, Forest is still one of the best in the game. You know why you had to do that, you daft cunt? Because clearly he isn't one of the best in the game. Clearly he hasn't been dominating every time. And the fact that you're having to highlight that he's now just had one good map says, actually, this guy isn't in a great place in his career. Because you know what, the Forest I know, you didn't have to comment every time he had a good fucking map. It was the other way around. You expected him to have a sick map. Like, it's like if you had a bad game, you'd be like, hey, what's up with this guy? It's not like, see, he's back again. It's like, why are you going out your way? So I know what you mean on that one. Like, people, I do think, I don't blame them. It's like I said, that's why I gave the Virtus Pro analogy. I want them to be super sick. Of course, that'd be amazing. But I do feel as though a lot of people, it's like they're more going on optimism than realism in terms of NIP at the moment.
Yeah, totally. I mean,
they are like the Mickey Mouse of Counter-Strike teams, where like you just have people that just like are in love with the nostalgia and in love with like the entire idea of like Disney World of NIP and everything like that. So my issue with them isn't the consistency of Forest, which I think is super up and down. I agree. I think he is a little bit inconsistent, but the whole team has those issues. Like, I still think, this NIP, they choose to go, I guess, quote unquote, younger. I mean, Lekro, in terms of his age, is older, but in terms of experience, was kind of like a younger.
For me, if you've only played a couple of years, you're still a pop in the game, you know.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is then the same question. This is what I haven't seen NIP overcome yet. Is it still feels like they haven't fully found a way to integrate Dennis into this lineup. Yes. I still feel like he is just like lost individually. I don't know what the deal is, and because he was playing so well when he was on Fnatic. Remember, he was like the pistol god. Yes. We're not even seeing the good pistol rounds out of him anymore. Yeah. So that kind of confuses me a little bit, how they still haven't worked out how to integrate him. I think they can be good. I think they're obviously going to get past this new challenger stage.
Yes, that's why, again, this is another team where we're not going to say on that part, because on paper that you have to predict them anywhere.
Right. I just, even when they face up against Astralis, and this comes to your point about like really overhyping the good moments for this NIP lineup, is if you remember like that DreamHack Stockholm where they played Astralis so close, like Forest won like 3-1 versus
they had a lot of
4s,
magical
like
rounds, yeah.
3. Yeah, and it was like they won like some 2-on-5s as well, 2-on-4s. So I mean, that kind of shit isn't going to get repeated again. But for me, the issue with this team has always been finding a way to get Dennis involved in it, and they haven't solved that problem, which kind of makes me really, really wary about saying that they've improved from what we saw towards the end of last year.
Well, the thing is, though, that's actually why one of the reasons why I don't see that much like I kind of think that this team's plateaued. Like you've seen mainly, you've seen the good nip, you've seen the bad nip. You know, either can turn up, they could make a run here. Like maybe they turn out to be legit, and the best of 3 factor means I think they're probably almost certainly going to get through. But I have to say that's the part that kills me, is that when everyone else was in good form with that run you're talking about, that exact period of like autumn of last year. If people remember, actually, this happened. I did a tweet right after, I think, the Stockholm run where I said, you know, I'd imagine this nip lineup, but you just take Dennis and you put Crims in his spot. And obviously, I'm just doing it as like a hypothetical, like, you know, making like a Swedish dream team or whatever. And I know at the time, like Dennis himself replied on Twitter with like, I don't know, fucking sad face or some shit like players do, like passive aggressively, you know. But the point in that scenario was, it's not to flame Dennis himself. It's that when he joined this team, it looked like he was going to be the savior of the team, because when he joined the team, he was actually the best player joining the team, as you're saying, Moses, because he'd been so good in actually the Fnatic team that had been doing fairly badly the year before. Yeah. But the problem is, it's like they've succeeded in spite of him, as harsh as that sounds to say. Yeah. Like in this team, he doesn't do much, and it's mainly when he doesn't do much that the team seems to do well, unfortunately. So I feel like it's kind of a wasted spot. And here's the part people probably don't get is, I even think it's a wasted spot for him. Because actually, like I'm alluding to, 2 years ago, he was the best of all the players that are in NIP right now, arguably. So I even feel like, I don't know what team it should be, but it feels like a waste of his talents. Like if you look at what people like Kiyashima and Flusher have done in Cloud9, I feel like it's time for Dennis to go somewhere. He should be on Mouse Sports or another NA team or some other squad like that. You know, this is a very talented player, but I don't know why, stylistically it doesn't work. Because as you say, even all the classic things that he had, like he actually doesn't win crazy pistol rounds in NIP. Who knows why? That's always been the weirdest one, because they did have all those mad pistol round players on paper.
The idea when he joined the team was like, oh, Dennis and Forrest in one team, like rip your pistol rounds. Like they're going to win them all.
Yeah.
They went through.
It's logical.
Yeah.
Like I thought the same thing. It's like, you remember when they first got Olaf Meister and Guardian into phase? That's basically what they did for the first 3 months. Is just win like 85% of pistol rounds, and then, you know, as a result, you're obviously going to have a good chance to win the game. That just never happened in NIP. Even when they were at their best, that wasn't who they were.
So they're a weird team, and I don't quite know what to make of them. I have to feel like this team is just looking for like one last ride into the sunset. You know, that's kind of the impression I get of this NIP team, is they're waiting for that one last victory. You know, they want to do the whole like Elway go out after winning a Super Bowl type thing, and you know, they're all just hanging on for that one last victory, and then they can hang their hat on that and they can be content. But I don't know what the win conditions are for this team. You have to have like one of Rez and Lekra go off. You have to have Forrest be nuts. And outside of that, it just feels like the firepower is not clicking. Not that the players don't have it, but it just feels like they are all kind of, in order to make everyone comfortable with how they play, everyone is like giving up a little piece. Like everyone is a little bit uncomfortable, and it's affecting some kind of weird performance where just players aren't clicking in some odd way. So yeah, okay. I think they can have some good results like individually, but overall, I don't think this is going to be a great event for them. Like they might get some cool upsets here or there, but I don't think they're going to be too happy with where they finish up overall at the major.
Sure. I would, like, for me, the category I would, like, this is one of those teams where, because I don't think they can do super well, like, they've got a shot, obviously, at making top 8, because I actually think this is a team where they could benefit them if they have the best of 3s, because the sad thing, actually, about being NIP, this also reminds me of the fall of Virtus Pro, which, by the way, I'm definitely not saying something to NIP, like, they're very far from as bad as Virtus Pro were in the last year or so, but one of the factors that kills you when you're in a bad spot as those teams is you yourself aren't as good as you were at your peak. But it's like, because you were at the absolute top of the mountain, even though you yourself aren't a top team, your name still has the same value as a top team. Yeah. So every motherfucker you play, even in like a tier 2 tournament, is gunning for you like it's the championship game for them. For you, it's supposed to be like, right, obviously I have to beat this team and then, get to the playoffs and then my real tournament. Meanwhile, they're playing like I say, like it's a fucking miracle on ice or something. So that as a result, you get at the end, so it gets really depressing. So I personally don't put on this team as like, they're going to go super far. If anything, I think they're just like upset fodder to maybe upset one of the better teams. That's what I think Nip can do in this tournament. Like they could be the one who fucks up like, MIBR or something in a match, and it's not like they're going to go further than MIBR, but you can help ruin MIBR's tournament by having a good match against them or something,
Yeah. It would be great if GetRight came into this tournament in hard carry mode and just like have like one last glory day, one last glory tournament where he was like, I am going to be the star player. Fuck this support shit, screw try to set up my teammates. I am going to take over. Me and Forrest going to be the Bash Brothers one last time.
Yeah.
And then I will run from my dream.
Yeah, you're so right about that with GetRight. Like, because I feel like every tournament we see like a picture of him alone at a bank of PCs grinding still. Because that's like his whole thing is like he's not that skilled mechanically, but he just grinds so hard. That he makes it work, and he's still grinding now, even though like he hasn't been the player that he was for so long. It's Nip for me is like the Nip magic is just amazing. Like it's totally a thing, and I think it is a compliment because they literally do things that like just don't make sense in the game. They just break the rules sometimes, and it's so beautiful to watch when it happens. But it's just and I feel like this team, like you said, Duncan, when they come into the major, like they could possibly upset, I think you said as well, they have a pretty good matchup against Astralis, and they think that as well, because they're not really scared of Astralis, and because they used to be that team that like Forrest and the GetRight used to just knock them out of every like major top 8 or top 4 or whatever it might be, even like coming from behind to do so. So yeah, I think that's probably a reasonable expectation for them coming in, but probably not something that they would be happy doing. They want to be a top 5 team for sure, because that's who they are.
Sure. The sad thing for players like that is like no player who's been a champion ever really wants to accept that it's over. Like you never do. That's why I always give the analogy as well, Moses, that like one of my favorite points in any like sports star's career is when you as a fan can actually sort of pinpoint like, shit, that he's probably never going to win again actually. Like, he's 2 years too old, or, this player's got injured on his team and he's probably never going to have the window to win again. Because it's still fun to watch them, because what's great is because they don't know that it's over, they still fight as though like they believe they can win. Like you say, every great sports star thinks I can win the one last trophy on the way out. Like if I just get everything comes together. But the problem is they don't realize that they themselves are doing what all the beginner teams do, which is they're only looking at the great tournament. And then when they have the bad one, they're like, that's not who we really are. It's like, I always say this to everyone, they all count. Like, even the tournament where you do your worst and everything goes against you, well, that obviously eventually is going to even out against the tournament where everything went perfectly and you got super lucky and you won the 1v1 you never should have, like, on average, if you can, like, put it this way, any team in the scene, I'm not exaggerating, go and get the last 5 results they have at any tournament and just do a rough, like, draw a line through it and say, what's the aggregate, what's the average of this thing, actually they place on average, like, 5th to 8th. That probably is who they are as a team, like, that's a pretty good data size. 5 tournaments, all the different teams you might face there. So I just think, if NIP was going to be the super duper team, like I say, with the lineup that they've had for this long, would have happened by now. I even think people slightly overblew some of their. Here's the problem: because they occupy the no man's land slot, like I say, they get to constantly benefit from the. Basically benefit of the doubt, Moses. So what happens is, on the one hand, when they haven't done anything for a while, well, you don't put any pressure on them because you're like, well, they're not supposed to be the best team. Yeah. But then when they have the good run, you go, oh, hey, actually, I'd stopped expecting much. So now you've done something. This is pretty cool, actually. Hey, it's like, funnily enough, it actually reminds me of the really old school Team Liquid teams. Because it's like, it's the teams where whenever you start to believe, it's like, it's the opposite of fairies. Whenever you start to believe, they lose all their power. Like, at that point, they have no ability. It's only when you literally say, like, actually, fuck this team. I guess North would be the analogy, right? As soon as you're like, actually, you know what? Fuck North forever. That's when you just know they're going to do, like, some miracle tournament. Like, we're still decent. Take that.
We say
Well,
we bounce back. We did
And
it.
then you're like, great. I thought I was done with North, but now I have to talk about these motherfuckers for 6 more months. Because you know, by the way, this is not even a joke, Moses. If you go throughout the whole of like esports media that covers CSGO, it's just teams like North being discussed on like 1 out of 3 episodes, because it's all the teams where nobody understands these teams or like why they're good or bad. It's like just a collection of players. So, okay, let's move on to another team. You pick one now, Moses. Who do you want to talk about? These teams in the field here.
I want to talk about Spirit.
This is one of the teams I know the least about, I have to say.
I know, I was just kidding. I just picked the team that I figured absolutely nobody knew about. Let's see. I really am not in the mood to talk about French teams because I don't rate any of them. We can talk about. Let's do this. Let's talk about the Aussies, wLe. Let's give you a shot here because I know nothing about Greyhound except for a penis sticker.
Sure. Well, it's not even that anymore.
Yeah.
So Greyhound. I think. So basically, obviously, because Renegades for so long now is just always like cherry picked the best players in our scene. It's taken a long and
worked out really well this time with Gratisfaction and
yeah, totally, absolutely. So Gratisfaction was the star opera on Greyhound for a while, and what was amazing about our scene, and it's still sort of true right now, is we had 4 top teams. After Renegades left and moved, it was pretty chaotic for a while, and there wasn't a clear number one. But now it's sort of settled, and there's these 4 tops teams: Greyhound, Chiefs, Tainted Minds, and Order. Greyhound have recently just sort of stepped ahead of the pack a little bit with the addition of Sterling to replace Gratisfaction. At the time, Gratisfaction and Liaz were like sort of noticeably better than everyone else. But in those top 4 teams, it was very hard to see weak spots. And it still kind of is. What's good about Greyhound is they're quite well-rounded. And I think Dexter's the in-game leader, and he's also probably one of their best players, along with Urkast, who is the first Mongolian ever at a major qualifier, I believe. So they're just quite well-rounded. I don't know how well they're going to do here because this competition is quite tough for them. I see a lot of people on Twitter actually predicting them to go 0-3, which I think isn't...
What the fuck? Isn't that a bit half? As Moses just said, Spirit's in the fucking field. Why are people picking them to go 0-3?
I know. I thought that was pretty harsh too, but like a lot of people are, which is surprising.
I'm not gonna lie. I put him in my 0-3 slot of my pick.
Oh, here we go. Yeah. At least you're honest. At least you're honest, Moses.
I did change it later, but that was my first run through. I was like, they're not getting the fucking...
But no, I think they do have a lot of upset potential, and sort of going back to the NiP.
Do they have enough upset potential to make it through this stage?
That's where I'm not sure, because they've gone to bigger events before, and obviously at IEM Sydney they had that amazing best of 3 versus FaZe, and they knocked out MIBR at the time. Yes. And FaZe went on to win the tournament, even though they were playing at like pretty much absolute dog shit in the group stage. So you could take that from that what you will. Since then, they haven't really had any big upsets or wins over good teams. So it's hard to know where exactly. And they had Gratisfaction at that time as well. So it's hard to know exactly where their level was. They did struggle a little bit at the minor, but I think they came through, and like they are probably looking in form. Like Sterling was always a question mark because he's like pretty inexperienced in comparison to the rest of the players. Like you could still say that's what's sort of amazing about the team is that because all the experienced players are in Tainted Minds right now, like this team is like they've got maybe two years each like playing at the top level in Australia, and then like only the last 6 to 9 months playing at international tournaments regularly. So, and even then they haven't always qualified. Like one of the other 4 teams, like I mentioned, is qualified for international events. So yeah, so they haven't really done anything since then. So yeah, it's really hard to say. I think they can do, they possibly could. I just wanted to add a little like sort of Easter egg in. So like when you mentioned NiP and how like teams here will play them like it's the championship game, and they like Urkast, the Mongolian player, who's like one of the best players in Greyhound, and he's been grinding super hard. He is like hardcore, the biggest Forest fan ever. So I'm really hope that they play each other. Like, there's a video on the Greyhound Twitter where they got him a signed mousepad from Forest, and he almost cried. So it's going to be really interesting. I really want to see those two teams play. But yeah, it's really hard to say.
Do you have any disappointment? Like, I know I'm just on HLTV looking at their recent results, and from the Asian minor, both Renegades and Greyhound dropping teams or dropping maps to the Asian teams. And this isn't to like smack down on the Asian teams or anything like that. But is there any, especially with Renegades, is there any disappointment that they're not like 2-0ing this or blowing them out of the water, being like, this lineup, you have.
Actually, Moses,
like, you should have blown some teams out of the water, right?
One of the things that actually people might not be aware of that is actually quite key is, it's a famous detail that until I think it was until 2017 or something, or maybe the end of 2017, Renegades had never won one of those Asian minors. They always used to come second and lose to like Tyloo or whoever, or Mongols in the first. Yeah, what was mad was the reason why it actually was unacceptable that they never won them. Like, not just the fact that, they had they were a bigger team and they were in NA, etc. It's that I remember when I asked around the Australian scene, a whole bunch of teams, when I used to know people in Immunity and the Chiefs, etc. All these teams actually who were from the Oz region, because they had to compete in online qualifiers against like the Koreans and the Chinese, etc. They knew those teams very well. They used to actually study their demos and have scouting reports on them. So it's not actually like the scenario if Furia plays Team Spirit. I don't blame Furia if they don't know Team Spirit. There's not really any reason you would. But in theory, they should be very well versed in some of these teams. So does that actually mean, in line with what Moses is saying, is Greyhound closer to those Asian teams that they're dropping maps to?
Not really, because do you mean in terms of skill level or in terms of preparation?
Yeah, how good they are as a team. Is that indicative of the fact they're close?
Are they
in
closer
level?
to the European and North American teams, or are they closer to the Asian teams? In terms
I would say they're closer to the Asian teams. They would play a more European style. I think what people don't give probably Renegades and I sort of agree. I could see both sides of it, I guess. Renegades and Greyhound, I think. So for me, every time an Australian team has played at the Asian minor, they should have been winning it or coming top 2 if there were two Australian teams there. But at the same time, so Vici play full time, Greyhound do not. And I know from my little experience, the Chinese teams will try very, very hard against Australian teams, I guess because they really don't want us to win. It's a matter of pride for them, I think. Probably because Renegades has quite a lot of sort of hype around them, and they've got a lot of fans, I guess. But in my experience, they play it's really hard to read them. They're just really, really hard teams to read. And I think Kassad tweeted about this once. Teams just don't understand how hard it is to play against Asian teams because they just don't play CS like EU or NA teams do. They play very fast and reactive, and they don't play it in a way that is predictable. And they're not ever scared. That's what's amazing about all of them, is they don't ever play scared. They just never do. Even if they should logically play more passive or defensive, they very, very rarely will. So it's that's why I don't necessarily blame Renegades or Greyhound for dropping maps against Vici. MVP I think is different because they play a much more conservative and structured style, and so for that reason, I think it makes sense. It makes a bit more sense, and it's a bit more forgivable, I guess, for Renegades and Greyhound to drop maps against them against MVP. Yeah.
Okay. The big problem for me with this team is just as we've alluded to, the very fact that Renegades actually is looking better now is because they took the best player from this team. So
yeah.
If they had the lineup that you were talking about from last year, the one that actually almost did back-to-back beat basically the old SK team and then FaZe Clan, so the two best teams of the previous few months. If it was that lineup, I'd give them a punching chance. Actually, they were kind of a team with some spunk, But I have to say, what's interesting about where Greyhound is at this stage of the major is that a lot of those teams at the bottom, like I mentioned before, what's interesting is it's not even at the bottom there's a clear parity. Like actually, like you don't really, you look, it's a real mixed bag. Once you, if you bear in mind, you're obviously going to pick 8 teams because they're the ones that make it through. You only get about 5 in, and you got a couple debatable, like, should I go this way? Should I go this way? But then for like either the last spot or just the teams just outside, it's everyone. It's almost everyone, like except for people, jokes aside, like it's Team Spirit that I doubt anyone thinks are going to be good, you know. There's a lot of other teams there that have some chance. So I'd put them in that mix. I think they have a possibility. I also think that's also why, for me, that part of the major is not as interesting. Because as I alluded to, when Team Spirit plays Furia, plays fucking Greyhound Gaming, plays Tai Lu, it's like, well, good luck. How's any of the... You know, I don't blame any of these teams for what the result is, because no one has any basis to know what this game's going to be like. And in fact, that is exactly where... I'll give an analogy here, which is like, even though I pointed out that Renegades, etc., you know, could have looked up the demos of Tyloo, etc., because it's unreasonable that you would have with those other teams, it wouldn't even help you anyway, because at least if Renegades looks up the demos, they can probably look up a demo of Tyloo playing Chiefs. Like, your difference is Furia can't look up a demo of anyone they'd actually understand the game, like the level of resistance against, for a team like Team Spirit. Like, there's no demo that exists. So, for me, that's like... My joke for all those teams is they're just like thrown in the bin pit. It's like, whoever makes it out, you made it out, well done. You know, we'll just assume like Darwin, Slaw, or whatever, like you should have made it out.
Where he just breaks the pool cue and he's like,
whoever makes it out, you made it, and success, well done. Whoever didn't make it, sorry, better luck next time. But I'm just going to spend time focusing on the good teams. So, right, let's pick another team then. So, Wooly, who are you going to pick?
Okay. Can we talk about Renegades actually? Because
if you want.
Because I actually think they're super interesting right now and probably the best they've ever looked. But I think because I've always wanted to do a show with Duncan and like Sponge at talking about the Australian scene, but it's just never happened. But because I just got so much to say about Renegades.
This is your pitch, so don't fuck it up now.
Just pretend we're doing it now, but without Chad here, so he just can't speak for himself. So perfect.
Yeah, exactly. So he's just going to be sitting there like, yeah. So,
but he can't complain because if he does,
exactly.
You know, you could have been there. So
yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So, Renegades right now, I think, look the best on paper, but I think they suffer from something that they've suffered at every roster move they've ever made. Now, I want to add the caveat that I think they've always made the move that I would have made in picking up the best Australian player from the scene. If you say that like ever picking up anyone else from any other region was off the table, which apparently it was for whatever reason, which I don't necessarily agree with. But if you're going to pick up the best a player from Australia, it should probably be the best player currently playing, which is what they've done every step of the way, pretty much. The only problem is they always had an overlap when it came to the style of play of these players, and currently they're suffering from that right now, because JKS and Liaz, I think, are both most effective and most experienced at playing the same style, which is more passive. Like, you know, everyone knows how JKS plays. So Liaz is, that's what you see. Like Liaz people were saying that Liaz would, in Australia, people were saying that Liaz would be better than JKS one day, because of how he plays. Like, I personally think that Liaz should be like the absolute center star of a team. Like, he should be able to AWP when he wants to, rifle when he wants to. He should have the whole game played around him. But that's obviously not what's happening. He's playing like quite a supportive role in Renegades right now, and that's why you don't see him always put up consistent numbers. Like, sometimes he will have really good games, but other times he doesn't, and I think that's just him finding his footing in this new team. He is still playing some of the roles that he did play in Order, so that's something that I think hinders them a little bit. They've just always had this like little sort of inconsistency with their roles, where they're missing. They're really strong in some aspects but weak in others. Like, so before it was these two players, it was like Azza and Ustillo were both probably more suited to being entry players, but they never so they had too much of an overlap there. They both should have been like just playing the one role. Then it was like Ricky and Yam, both AWPers. So on and so forth. So I think they look right now really good, actually. I'm really amazed. Not amazed, but I'm really pleasantly surprised at how Azza's doing as the in-game leader. I think he's doing a really good job. I'm really glad to see Kassad back, because as soon as he left, it just all went to shit. And I'm glad that Nifty is gone. As great as it was to see him on the AWP, I just didn't think he could make the AWP IGL work, and I can see that he's given up on that anyway now in Envy. So, I'm really excited to see what they can do, and I think they can make it to the next stage.
I had to laugh to myself a little bit when you said that everyone knows how JKS plays, because I'm not going to lie, after like 4 years of watching JKS and Azza, I still have no idea where they should play or how they should play. I have no idea if they're supposed to be entry fraggers.
The analogy basically, Moses, would be that like they are basically like the Get Right and Forest of Australian CS. JKS just is naturally more of like a lurk type player, and then Azza generally was at his best as an entry type player.
No, but the weird thing is, I feel like I know how I know what they do when they play the game, but I don't know like what they should do, because I feel like the most success I've seen Renegades have is when guys like we spent like 2 or 3 years being like Azza and JKS, these are going to be the stars of Renegades. These are the guys who need to have the impact. These are the guys who need to put up the big numbers. And I feel like the most success I've watched Renegades have for the longest period of time has been when they are more in the background. And you have other guys being the star. Like when Jacob first joined this team, he was very, very good, and he was the one putting up the big numbers. You had Naf in there as well, who was just going god tier, and JKS and Azza weren't the stars of the show. So I've operated under the assumption for 3 years that these guys are the stars of Australian Counter-Strike, and they should be put in those positions. But like it seems like the most success I've ever witnessed them have is when those guys aren't the top fraggers, aren't the ones getting all the attention.
Along those lines, then,
when Naf was performing like a top 3 player.
Obviously, yeah. Well, one thing I want to ask Wooly about actually is along those lines then, because put it this way, the analogy I would give would be if everyone can remember before Simple joined Team Liquid, when at the time wLe and Nitro was supposed to be like, right, when these guys get to the their peak level, then we're going to have like 2-star players and we're going to be sick. It's like, the rest of the team's like good enough, or veterans, it's like you'll have the team in place. Well, I would agree with you. That never really happened in Renegades. Like, as you say, the periods when people remember they got good, ironically, really were. It was because of the foreign imports. Like they made the right coach choice, they made the right got Jacob at the right time, Naf was going ham at the right time. Like this all made a lot of sense. But the thing I wanted to ask about in this sense was, so those two players, JKS and Azza, obviously Azza's taken this very weird career turn by becoming the in-game leader, and clearly if you look in the game, it isn't based, like he's not going to be the star player in the team. But actually it seems like the last few months have changed JKS's kind of trajectory though. Like, why has he been carrying so much? And what do you think about the new Renegades in that sense?
From what I understand, like I haven't been keeping up as much recently because my life's been quite hectic outside of the game. But from what I understand, JKS he's started realizing he needs to have more of a voice in the team. He started realizing this I think at IEM Sydney 2017. Actually, that's what Gomez, their manager, said to me. So I imagine that he's started to realize, because I think because you remember when JKS first came into the lineup in Vox way back in 2014, if you can remember, he was the inexperienced player. Like, even though he had been playing since he was like 11 or something, he was coming into the best team in Australia with all the best players who had all the accomplishments. So he was just playing his role. He was quiet. He was known for being a quiet person anyway. But now it's come full circle. He's the most experienced player along with Azza, other than Jacob, obviously. So he has to start taking some of the responsibility that comes along with that experience. And I think that has helped him sort of realize that he can make plays and take it upon himself to he's thriving under that pressure, I guess, to succeed, and that he's put on himself. So that is my guess, and I think he probably under Azza's, because Azza as well probably understands how he plays and how he likes to play, so he's probably activating him in that aspect as well, a little bit, I would say.
Because actually, that's the thing that I'm actually quite interested in this particular Renegades lineup, because I have to say, I wasn't like a big fan of the Nifty lineup, because actually I think mainly probably stemming from Nifty, they were so up and down. It's like they could be solid, but then also they would have games where it's like I said before, like the North analogy, like right exactly when you started to believe in them, they'd always let you down. They'd break your heart every time they made the playoffs after having a strong Swiss system or GSL group stage. But that one of the things that used to always underwhelm me about Renegades is, aside from periods when like NAF was hard carrying, etc., they always seem to have underwhelming firepower in the actual tournaments. Like, they had good players, but a bunch of them never did it. Whereas, actually, this lineup, adding in Gratisfaction, it's not like he has to hard carry the team. The actual firepower is pretty legit in this Renegades lineup. Like, they've got a pretty decent spread within the team. So I would go ahead and, obviously, on paper, I would have them get out of this stage. I think that it's pretty reasonable to expect it. But I definitely am wondering what the ceiling for this team is, though. Like, what do you actually think on that ground?
Yeah, that's hard for me to say as well. I think I don't know if they would make the top 8. Like, I think that would be
because the other thing to mention as well that we didn't mention, because I guess even though this was different lineups, you have to add in the framing that, like, one theme that remains for Renegades. Remember, in other tournaments like IEM Sydney, they've made top placings before, they've had some good runs occasionally, but one thing that still remains to this day is Renegades has never done fuck all at a CSGO major in any variant ever in the history. In fact, famously, they used to be the team where, when this was the major qualifier, they just bombed it every fucking time, didn't they? Like, that was the depressing thing. So obviously, my hope is, if they really do have like a better lineup generally, this should be the best chance of ever, maybe, to make it through. And you've got the best of threes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the best of threes will definitely help them for sure, I reckon, because they're much more well-rounded now. Like, when they had those players in the past, like Ustillo and Yam, and these players were very niche, I think. Like I said, there was always an overlap between at least two players and how they like to play the game, and so someone had to take some roles that they didn't like. Liaz is the one doing that now, and like I said, he probably is the most skilled player that the Australian scene has ever seen, like, debatably, with JKS. Like, again, most people, like a few like sort of old school players, would say that Azza should be the best player, but I think he's sort of shown now that that's not who he's going to be, or maybe even who he wants to be. But sure. I think he could be a great, like, emotional leader for this team, and that's probably what he's doing, because he has the like literally and figuratively the loudest voice in this team. So yeah, I think it's like, if they made top 8, I think that, like, would be a little bit surprising, but it's not outside the realms of possibility. But it would be a little bit of a, like, miracle run. But I think they should make it through to the top 16 for sure.
Okay.
All right, there we go. Renegade's going to get past that major qualifier.
Right, if in that case, Moses, thematically, if we're going to talk about teams that have done things but never done anything at a major, we should talk about NRG. It's the obvious one, right? Because, like, this is actually the funny thing is, like, if NRG had failed the minor, like, it's very fitting that Mouse Sports did it as well, because both those teams were in the exact same spot. It's like, you've had results outside of the major cycle that are so good, you should be considered a top team. You've earned that status. You're, like, definitely top 10. Depending on your day, maybe you're like top 5, top 6, whatever. But the problem is, like, everyone does in their brain still hold the major as the most important tournament, and so you have to perform there eventually. Otherwise, I feel like you can't. It's like, imagine like unlocking an achievement. It's like, until you've actually done that, I don't think you've actually arrived as a player. That's one of the reasons also, by the way, I noticed that everyone forgets about that Cloud9 major run, is 4 of the 5 players, basically everyone except Tarek and Cloud9, had never even been in the playoffs of a major.
Yeah.
Like, they'd done great things elsewhere. Like, obviously, they'd been in finals of tournaments, even won championships, but they'd never done it in a major. And so, until you make that breakthrough and you actually do it, not just, like, have the potential to do it, that is kind of like a threshold for me. You have to cross that. So, Moses, is this NRG's time to do it?
Yeah, I think it is. I think, because I even thought if they didn't qualify for this major, that's when I would have had it in my head. Like,
that's when they got to think about the roster move. Yeah.
Just because you can't operate on such a high level for that long and then just fail in the most spectacular fashion. Like, not making London, to me, was, like, egregious. If they'd done it twice, for sure, it would have been over. I think, obviously they're going to make it through the stage. I think this is a very good team, and actually, it's one of those things heading into this. There's almost like this. I think there's a chance to make a crazy kind of prediction for this major, and almost say that there's a very real possibility that there can be 3 North American teams in the top 8. I think this NRG team, despite their failures, I think they're still, if you're a fan out there and you're sleeping on their ability to make it deep into this tournament, you're crazy, because they still, this team, you always talk about the young potential of the players like Breeze, Ethan, and Cirque, who you have to feel really haven't hit their peak yet. Like, I don't think we've seen the best out of them yet. But even more importantly for this team, this major is going to be a testing block for Daps more than I think anyone else. Because remember, Daps is that in-game leader in North America who's been able to take lineups and he's been able to make them good. He's been able to make them contenders, and he's never been able to get over that hump into like being like a very strong top 10 team with tournament winning aspirations. He's never been able to get over that hump. So for me, this major, we're going to talk about Breeze, we're going to talk about Ethan, we're going to talk about Cirque. But this major for NRG is way more into like the pedigree of Daps, and can he finally make it happen? Because he's been close to retirement. There was conversation around how he wanted to coach this team and not actually be the.
I believe that didn't they do something like for like a few days or a week?
Yeah.
He was listed as the coach, and then he was no longer listed as the coach.
Yeah, so I mean,
Fugly was in game leading.
Yeah, he's had his tough stretches, but I mean, they are very, very good, very talented, and I think more importantly is like they have like that, Daps with that like kind of he's been competing for much, much longer at the top level in North America, so it almost feels like he's got like this kind of more old school viewpoint. I say old school when it's only really been like 4 or 5 years, so it's not really that, but he has a little bit more of like the classical style of thinking in terms of how to play Counter-Strike. But then you have like these young players, whippy, snappy aim. They like to be fast-paced. They like to be very aggressive, and they can do crazy things. So you have almost this like natural fusion of the styles, because Daps wants to call something a little bit more relaxed and laid back and defaulty, but you have these guys who are just like rearing to go in each round. So I think they have a very unique way of playing the game that even like Liquid, that even Cloud9 haven't really touched. So Energy, and probably one of the best young operas we have in all of Counter-Strike and Cirque. So, I mean, they're going to be a dangerous team, and I don't think they should have any issues getting through this first group. It'll be the next one where you kind of see them hit a wall.
What do you think, wLe?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think they should be. I don't think it's an unfair expectation for them to make the top 8. That's what they should be definitely aiming for at the very least, because I think that's where you should probably be thinking about them in terms of world rankings, and based on what we've seen from this team so far. The question mark really is that Daps and Fugly, I think between them, I think Fugly's been to 3 majors, Daps has been to 1, and then the other 3 have never been to a major. And obviously Daps and Fugly have never done anything at a major, I'm pretty sure. So so it's that's where because obviously what's interesting about the majors is because they have like you guys said, that they're in everyone's mind as being the most important tournaments of the year, or in ever. It's such a big thing, and it's so hard to qualify for them now. It's just getting harder and harder every year, and to get deep in them. There's always teams that we expect to do well, and then for whatever reason they just absolutely crash out. And there's players for whatever reason that perform really well at majors when they otherwise wouldn't perform particularly well at other tournaments. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this affects Cirque, Ethan, and Breezy, who I think are all incredible players, and they're just so like you were talking about, Moses, Breezy and Cirque especially, you could see they're just dogs on the end of a leash, with a stake hanging, just dangling in front of their face, they're just so ready to go. And Daps is just holding on for dear life, trying to keep them back to the key moment. I was watching a few games of them recently, and it's actually amazing how disciplined they are, and how I really like how they play. It's going to be really interesting to see how they do, but I think for sure they should be aiming for the top 8.
To me, go on.
I'm just wondering about them as a team in their map pool. Have they spent any time, deepening it? Train is a map they enjoy, but I mean, they're one of those teams that just is always banning nuke, not great on cash. So, I mean, they have a couple questions if you actually want to get into the details and nitty gritty of them as a team. I think the map pool not being super well rounded has hurt them, and I'm hoping they've added something into it during all this time off. Go ahead, Bron.
Yeah, the problem NRG had as a team is basically what you're saying there. It's they had a few maps they were really good on. So everyone knows the Overpass game is the most obvious one because that's where they became famous. But you add in Train because so many other teams in the team don't play Train, but it's nearly always available within the veto because so few teams are going to ban it. because both those two factors obviously connect. If no one plays a map, but then no one plays it, you don't have to ban it against each other. So generally, like, they have lived or died by having to win maps like Mirage and Train. But what's bizarre about them as a team is they have always been willing to mix in cash. They've played some Dust 2, etc., but they're just not super convincing on those maps. So I agree. The main issue with them is, what's bizarre is that's actually why I think they're a good best of 3 team, because they're always going to get one map they're good on, so they're always in with a shout in the best of 3. But also, they are a team I've seen lose way too many. Like, every time you're like, right, they got the matchup now, the team they're playing might be better on paper, but, you know, they could match up well here. It's like, this is why I wonder kind of the DAPS angle that you brought up, because I do think that teams, especially when they've had a lineup for a while, take on some of the DNA of like the in-game leader, basically. And so if you look at this particular team, they do have some of the like the DAPS quality where it's like, it's good to a point, but then you always question kind of the like killer instinct aspect of like, you know, the mentality. Because when I think of like a DAPS team and I think of this NRG team, sure, they're on a higher level scale wise than the past ones where you'd expect them to go out on a group stage, but they do have that kind of bullshit angle of like, oh, well, oh, shucks, I tried. You know, it was going real well in the game. One map won. Yeah, sure, they won map 2. And then it's like,
what a killer instinct is.
No, they're just like, oh gosh, well, we tried. Because, you know, that's one of the things that actually, it's one of those areas of psychology that you can't break down. You can only observe, unfortunately. Like, you can only, as an outsider, it's very easy to say, but I get why players can't change it. But like, there is a type of player in the scene where, whereas people like some of the SK lineups, the Brazilians and Virtus Pro when they're at their best, whereas these teams, when they're in like the hardest spot, inexplicably that brings out the best in them. That makes them like somehow sort of like, it challenges them. And then if anything, you know, when they're supposed to lose is when they pull out like the amazing round and you're like, Jesus, the balls on these guys, like, oh, they're still in this game. NRG is the opposite of that, unfortunately. It's like when they're in that position and you're pulling for them, it's like the fucking, because they are just like a Disney movie fucking team, isn't it? Like, what? Oh, golly, what if all these guys who didn't make it in other teams got together? Misfits. And I tell you what, if we give it our best darn try, we could probably make it all the way to the, oh, we're already out. Shit, we didn't make the, like, it's like that sort of shit, isn't it? Like, it's just depressing. So
they are the team at the end of the Disney movie that loses, but with a really good message, with a really.
And then Daps is like the fucking dad / player coach who's like, listen, all you guys, you gave it your goddamn best. I know we didn't win the state championship, but I tell you what, I'm proud to have served you. And then they all give him like
special.
And then obviously at that point he's just fired from the fucking like local softball team, but they all do like the Dead Poet Society, like captain, my captain, when he leaves, like because they at least appreciated what he brought, Moses. That's what matters. So yeah. I kind of agree with most of the sentiments. When you add in the best of 3s to these formats, they have actually no excuse for failing, quite frankly. Yeah. Like if you look at them and the teams they're going to likely match up against, on paper, they should actually be able to crack top 8. That's actually reasonable. Beyond that, I don't know that I have much more expectations myself. Like, they are a team, like I say, I'll bet against them all day long when it's like the big pressure game. But what I do like is, in this sort of a field and with a sturdy format, they're a pretty solid team. Like, by the by, I would very much expect them to crack top 8.
This is what's wild, though, about this major is, like, I look at these teams, and if you want to talk, like, if you want to put a list of all the teams that Energy can beat, right, like,
there's
you're
a lot.
probably going to take us for most teams. You'll take Astralis out and just say it's possible, but let's not expect it. Outside of that, Liquid's going to be a tough opponent, but everyone else has some critical flaw. Like Na'Vi, I've never seen a top 5 team more susceptible to upsets. Like if Simple isn't going crazy, like that team is extremely vulnerable to just even get knocked out outside of the top 8. FaZe, another one of those teams. We saw them at E-League. They didn't look great unless like Guardian was going nuts in the grand finals. Nico is going nuts in one of the other best of 3s. Fnatic's a toss-up. Cloud9 still has some question marks. MIBR, who knows if this lineup is actually going to be able to So, I mean, you look at this, and this is a wide open field for the NRGs, for the Cloud9s, for the Ences to be able to come in, because every team has a chance to be upset outside of Astralis, and even Team Liquid is not like this unbeatable monster. So this is a wide open field for top 8.
Sure. I also, one last thing I wanted to say about NRG is like one thing that actually made them legit for me is even when they had their first runs and they had the Star Ladder run all the way to the finals and they had top 8 at ECS, at that point in time, because the whole storyline around their team was like, wow, look at Cirque, like, look, he's so good for a player, he's come to NA, like, no one expected anything. Well, the problem is when they had a whole bunch of tournaments where he was a bit lackluster or in the big game he didn't play well, like at the time that just killed them dead because they were just like, they built so much of the team around him. But to be honest, the latter part of last year, it was mainly the other players who were going ham in the team. Actually, he kind of cooled off a bit, and if anything, they looked just as good, if not better. Like, they looked at a more well-rounded team. So I actually think they've also gotten over some of those issues, because the good thing is, like, I know the analogy is too easy to make with them and Team Liquid, but the reason why I give that analogy is because if you literally have 3 players who are on the cusp of becoming really good, you've literally got 3 chances for it to happen. You don't need all of, like, if you've only got one of these guys, yeah, you can sit back and go, oh, if this one guy gets really good, then we could be much better. Like, that's 4 people sat around waiting for that guy to get better for no reason. If you've got 3 people in the team, if one of these guys takes the step up, because I thought the same thing happened in Team Liquid. When Team Liquid first got going at the beginning of last year, if you'd have told someone, like, you know, because at the time, like, Naf was clearly the best player in the team. If you'd have told someone, oh, yeah, later in the year, actually, Naf's probably going to cool off for a bunch of tournaments, you'd think, oh, well, they're fucked then. But it wasn't the case, because obviously then Twists took over, and then he was going ham for a few months. So the thing about NRG is, like, on one level, you're totally right, Moses. If they'd have bombed this minor, I would have said, you had a good run, you know, you got something going, but it's time to make a move. Like, either you make a bold move, or a team like a Cloud9 does a big move, like, let's buy someone for a lot of money, you know, and bring them over. But it could also be the other way. Like, this is also the time where if they take a step up, there is potential to be unlocked here.
Oh yeah, I mean, like I said, these guys are all so young that I think there's still another level that they can find, especially guys like Breeze and Ethan with the rifles. There's a lot of room for improvement there. Ethan's already done a great job just by fucking changing his name from Nati. He actually put it the right way and say his goddamn name. But this team has some cool things going for them, and I think they are going to do very, very good this major. I think they'll get top 8. I think it would be a disappointment for me. It would be a disappointment if they don't make top 8. Okay. Which is, I guess, a little bit, you know, put some pressure on them and everything like that, in a way. But I think they're too good, and they have too much ability to beat the other teams that are going to be in the top 8. Like I said, like outside of Astralis, even Team Liquid has been pretty susceptible to getting beat by NRG. So outside of Astralis, I don't really see a team in this major that NRG should be, you know, afraid of in any way, or should be going into as underdogs in any way. I was actually surprised. I opened the top 10. They're ranked 6. I didn't even realize that it happened. Cloud9's 7.
No, plus the other thing, actually, since you referenced it, is normally I would say a team like NRG, because you've had the same exact lineup, it's like, well, don't expect anything too crazy. But actually, the ridiculous thing about this major, I don't know how this seems to happen so many times for majors. Why do we have to have majors where it's like they always get into the fucking section of the Venn diagram where it's like most teams are either having roster problems or are literally like, you know, haven't played for 3 weeks. It's like, why is that when the fucking major is every time? So the key thing for a team like NRG is they're not coming with a brand new lineup. They're not coming with a player who's broken. They're not coming with a guy who's going to be kicked in 1 month when you do badly. They're not coming with a guy who's brand new and never played with this lineup. Like, they have really no excuse to fail this time. Like, they have all the factors there. I'm with you, Moses. Like, even I'll use the same analogy I did for the players in reverse for the teams. Again, they only need 1 or 2 of these teams ranked above them to do worse. And they've got a legit, like, that could be a top 4 finish. And that's not ridiculous. You look how many of the teams have made the gamble move. MIBR's made the big move. FaZe has made a move. Like, Na'Vi looks like they're about to literally fucking break up, and who knows who's going after this lineup. So, if anything, if you're an RG, you're kind of in that scenario where it's like you're just chilling and everyone else is going to shit, and hopefully that means you just kind of like fucking wacky races. Like, all the other cars are crashing and like having, like, you know, ramming each other off the road. You're just the cheeky little cunt. Like, you know, in wacky races, there'd always be some shit character who's just like a comedic scene, you know, like when everyone else crashes, they're like, oh, crap, like some old grandma driving by, like, I'm coming third this week. It's like, they could do that. That's it, Daps. That's what you need to do. That's your speech. You're never going to win the tournament. Don't be silly. You could be the old grandma. I don't even know if this character exists in wacky races who finishes third. Third's still pretty good. That's a medal position. You're old woman.
You know what we need out of this major? You know those clips of like Shocks or Existence giving like the pregame speech that's all intense? It's fucking epic as shit. Like it's like a scene out of Braveheart. We need to get one of those and juxtapose it with like Daps giving a pre-game speech.
But he has to do it real though. He can't. Yeah, the point of the joke here is obviously he doesn't copy them. He doesn't go like, "We have 5 fingers. You get together, you make a fist, you strike the enemy in his face. He is bleeding. You see the blood. Your brothers fight for the blood." Like, you're not doing that shit. We want it to be actual Daps' personality. You know, like, guys, I called you here for this meeting to talk about what we're going to do with this tournament. I believe in you. I believe in you. I believe in you. And then they're like, he's like, no, wait a minute. I believe in you. Like, you know, and then he's like reading off a piece of paper and like really awkwardly, like, the potential for us, limitless. Our belief in each other, unending. It's like, because you know, it'd be like a middle manager where they're trying to do like the PowerPoint presentation, you know, and they're trying to hype you up. Yeah, of course. Yeah, guys, if you could just get your shit together and finish top 8 this major, that'd be great.
So we're going to pick Nuke, and we're going to ban Dust 2, and we're going to beat him. We're going to go outside. I think that'd be a really funny piece of content.
A lot of people think we're not going to win this major. I don't know if they're right. Just like, because on the one hand, he has left it open that, you know, they could be wrong, but like, he doesn't want to go too far because that'd just be rude, you know. Well, you know,
Canadian. You'd have to
far be it from me to say they're wrong. I just disagree. Like, this should be a new theme, like basically DAP style pre-game speeches. And the idea is you have to like obviously extrapolate the concept so far that it gets ridiculous, you know.
I do feel bad.
Motivational speeches.
I do really like Daps. Daps is a great guy. It's all in good fun.
No, but here's the problem though. The one thing that kills me, Moses, is the reason why this is almost like not just a joke. Like, we're not just totally stereotyping and exaggerating his personality. It is sort of like this. This is the people that depress me, Moses, is the ones where you actually can't banter Daps, because if you banter Daps, it's just bullying. Like, what happens is if you say to him, like, if you go like, say he makes some tweet and you go like, well, I don't know, Daps, some teams don't turn up at the majors at all, eh? He would just sort of like be, yeah, you're right, we did bad. It's like, oh shit, man. I mean, you can do it next time. I get it together, dude. Like, I didn't want to bring your confidence down. Like, Jesus Christ, man. Like, give me some pushback. Come on, like, because you know, like, one of the things that's normally famous was, I mean, speaking of fucking Navi, obviously normally teams are the other way. They're all like mad delusional, aren't they? Like, fuck you. How dare you call me the 5th best leader of all time? Normally they're like totally unreasonable, aren't they? So I don't know, it kills me, doesn't it? Anyway, we'll do one last team to round out the show.
I want to put you on the spot. We don't have to go into
go
it.
on.
Your French team, G2. But let's just do G2 and Vitality.
Okay.
All in one.
Let's just do that as the last section then, because they're the most interesting teams.
Well, we can do ENTs as well, which I guess would be interesting. But I just want to know, does anyone think the French teams are going to have an impact on this major?
The problem I have is, like, both teams are kind of like, I'll just go ahead and say it. Like, both teams feel like mixed teams, even though they're not. Like, in theory, both teams are real projects, and these are real players they've recruited, and these players all have roles and have practiced, etc. But like the Vitality team, I mean, people have seen it already. Half the reason, like, this is where people can be very illogical. On the one hand, how can you be so excited about Ziwu and how much he's hard carrying if you then can't also recognize that if he was super hard carrying, the rest of his team is fucking shit? Like, the two things have to be connected. Otherwise, why are you so impressed? So generally, it is true. He has been ridiculously hard carrying them. I know, like, in a few games, like maybe Apex or something, joined him, and NBK generally, because you don't expect much from him because he's in game leaders, has been doing pretty well. But actually, as a team, it's basically just the Ziwu show. Let's see how far he can go. So that team has one level of interest. The problem is when you go and look at the G2 lineup, right? Bearing in mind they haven't played many actual LANs with this lineup. So in the online qualifier for the IEM Sydney thing, things were looking good actually. Like Shox and Kenny S were having good games. That's just online, so no one knows what to expect on LAN. Like, I don't really see any reason why either of these teams should actually be a good team, basically. Like, it's quite logical to me that they're not that good. They're kind of just like wishy-washy, and they're probably just upset fodder for maybe they could steal a map from someone. But like, for me, the killer here is these are the teams where they have the name value, but I think this is where the best of 3 part of the format will kill these teams dead. Like, obviously at this point, yeah, they could make it through this stage. Like, I would pick one of the two, probably Vitality, to make it through. But the idea they're going to make top 8, it's like, in what universe? Like, for what reason? Put it that way. I don't even think they could come up with a good reason as to why.
Mate, what happened to Kenny S?
Well, like I say, believe it or not, recently online he's been playing pretty well. But yeah, obviously he's been fairly underwhelming for a solid, like, we're talking like 8 months now. It's pretty ridiculous.
It's breaking my heart. Yeah, I don't have either. I'm with you. I think if a team makes it, if one of them makes it out of this first stage, it's going to be Vitality. I mean, they obviously both could. I just at this point have no expectations for any of the French teams, which is
the problem. The problem they have in the scene, Moses, and this is the killer, is that obviously because of the meme of French shuffles, we all look down the timeline every time they don't have either one team that's good enough or two teams that are good generally. We all know they could make two teams that are decent or one team that's amazing. So everyone starts to look down the line, right? When could we have another shuffle? Like 6 months? Do we need it? Does a certain player need to be available? The problem, and what's depressing, Moses, is that basically that window already came and went. And because of how unfortunately all three of the different teams went different directions, they all did shuffle players, but in a way that wasn't really like very convincing. So unfortunately, and either that Vitality team had to end up being super duper, or that's it. Like that was the shot at being good.
I don't even know if they could make one good team. Like I can't name a single one of like the legacy French players that is playing at a good level right now.
Well, Kiyashima.
It's not an. That's okay. Yeah,
sure.
That's fair. You know, there's one.
But no, but I that's that. If anything, that's an indictment because obviously at the moment he's not going to play in the French teams, is he? So that says it all, right?
But I do just look at all these names, and it's like you think NIP is kind of sad seeing some of those legends really struggling to have good performances and good wins. The French one is even worse. I don't know. The Shocks is just falling off the face of the earth. Kenny S, same thing. Body as well. The young players they've brought into these teams haven't, outside of Zaiwu. I know Alex has some interest in. He's played well at times on LAN as a British player in French teams, but this is it's like a sad state of affairs. I don't see any French teams getting top 8 at all.
Part of the problem as well for me is that if you notice, like I will say, this is an example where sometimes I influence the scene in a way that like, let me think how you describe it. It's like it just skews discussion too much because obviously people love if I'm wrong, right? So because the G2 lineup had the dream lineup, it was Kenny S and Shocks and Existence at the same time. So obviously that prospect was very exciting. So people went way too hard trying to use Vitality as like the vessel to represent everything that isn't G2. Like basically for everyone else, the Vitality lineup is like the anti-G2 fucking death equation or something, right? Like in the same way as when they made the first super team LDLC lineup, it was the whole point of that team, for anyone who doesn't know, is like it was like the fuck Existences club. Like it was like everyone who played with Existence who didn't want to ever again was like, fuck that guy, we're doing exactly the opposite of what he made us do. That's why they just force bought all the time, just played all the scrim maps, Yeah. Well, the problem is, that would have been great if Vitality had ended up living up to the value of all the names. If they'd have been super duper, I'd have said, yeah, you know what, fair play, the narrative checks out, you're right, G2 failed, and why did they fail? Well, there's a logical reason. They didn't get these players. All of these players over here are the players they needed. The problem is that hasn't worked out either. Like the first part of the equation, everyone was right. Yeah, you know what? G2 didn't work out. You know what? Vitality's pretty fucking underwhelming too. Like at this point, unfortunately, the conclusion isn't you need this player to join or you need this. It's like the whole scene's just underwhelming.
It strikes me, and I mean, I guess.
And you know the other thing you have to say as well, right? You know there was that stat that everyone remembers because it was Nato himself who brought it up of like, the last time Shocks was in a major playoffs, it was before the Boston major, was like when I was still playing. So he was referencing that was like 3 years ago. That's the other problem with the French teams is the last French team to do anything was obviously the team that won the like DreamHack Masters Malmo of G2 at the end of 2017, right? Like three quarters of the way through. Yep. That's over a year ago now. So eventually we're going to hit the point where like it won't even be fair anymore to be like, why isn't the French scene good? It's like, you can't just go years without producing a good team.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, that win at Malmo was like, I think an isolated win.
Oh, it was a mad fluke, yeah.
Yeah, even outside of that, they didn't do anything. It strikes me, and I mean, I haven't watched either of these two teams in significant depth just because they literally don't interest me. I'm just exhausted of being disappointed in them. But they strike me as teams that like do a lot of really cool theory crafting and like things that like you write down outside of practice or outside of a match and is like, in theory, this should work. Like it all sounds good outside the game, but like when you actually try and execute that kind of theory or that strategy, it just kind of crumbles and fails for whatever reason. They strike me as teams that are trying to do too many things that are very good to think about, but don't actually have the impact that you want them to have. and they just keep going in that cycle. Like especially with like NBK, and I love NBK, and I think he can be a great in-game leader. But as he adjusts to this in-game leadership role, it feels like some of the things that he wants to do just like aren't as successful as they work out in his brain, you know?
What do you think, wLe? Pick either team or the two together if you want to talk about the scene.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's really sad. It's sort of like Nip a little bit. Because I've been, watching CS:GO since the very beginning pretty much. So like seeing Kenny S and Shox just struggle, and NBK even is just an Apex. Like these players that did so much for so long, and it was just, and like each of them were just so unique in how they approached the game and like the impact that they had upon the game and how it's changed. It's really sad. Like I'm almost worried, like it feels like Virtus Pro is like the canary in the coal mines for one nationality teams, and the French and the Swedish scenes are going to follow suit, because what they're struggling with is finding players, like, obviously there's certain players in the French scenes that won't play with each other, but at the same time, they're really struggling to find players to bring up. Like apart from Ziwu, like you mentioned, like Alex, and then there's like Lucky and Jax that they've picked up in G2, but like these players aren't incredible. Like they're not going to change the fucking game. Like, or at least if they do, it's going to be a long time from now, and no one's really going to see it coming. Like, so yeah, like Ziwu is just absolutely like the exception that proves the rule a little bit, and it's like, yeah, I feel like almost the whole scene needs to implode and build from the ground up, or they just need to go international.
That's actually, I think, probably the most depressing thing about their whole scene is that, like, Ziwu, obviously, in his very limited experience, looks like the real deal. It actually does look like the next Kenny S, Shox to join that group. Like the trajectory is there. Like if this guy gets the right team, but that's exactly the worst part. He's unfortunately the timing of when he's come up is when like there is no French team for him to join that's world class. Like every one of those players, they had an established scene, and it's like think of players like Magisk and Config and stuff from the Danish scene. It's like you've got an obvious structure. Like I'm going to go to this team, which is the second best team. Once I get some upsets or I perform myself, I go up the ladder, and it's like you got a team waiting for you. At the moment, like Ziwu's just at the beginning of his career, and he's having to hard carry people already. Like this is bullshit. Like you shouldn't have to be in that position. Like I'll say this. As much as I'm having to downplay the guy because everyone's going too far the other way and like giving him the crown before he's done it, basically, I will say it's very rare that as the rookie, you're the one who has to fucking carry the team, and you're the one who has to literally like power your team with all veterans through the tough game. That's actually the one thing you don't expect from the rookie. Normally you give him so much benefit of the doubt, million get out of jail free cards. So I actually feel bad for him as well, because another thing I'm worried about is every other player in the French scene came up when they had all the good in-game leaders in France. So they all came up through a system, through a style. They all learned the game at a decent level or had their own like internal philosophy. If you're Ziwu, at the moment, all you're being taught in the game is like trust no one, just like get the AWP every round and just win these 1v3s that are impossible. Like, what are you teaching this guy? Like, on the one hand, maybe it could be awesome in the way like watching, like, there was kind of like a perverse pleasure to Simple being in Na'Vi last year, where it's like, especially before Electronic got good, because the perverse pleasure was, on the one hand, it sucks to see a guy get held back by his team when he literally could win most of the tournaments. But on the other hand, the pleasure part comes from the fact that, like, if his team wasn't that bad, he wouldn't even have as many chances to do this insane shit that he's doing. So on the one hand, I enjoy watching Vitality for that reason. It's just like, right, can Ziwu carry this game? Fucking hell, he can. But on the other hand, he shouldn't have to do that much. Like, actually, it would be a better world for the French scene if he was a lot less impressive, because they just had a team effort and they just beat teams because they were good, not because they had one dude who was just carrying.
But I think that's actually a pretty important thing with Ziwu, and it's almost, we've mentioned it a little bit about the French teams, is it feels like they just haven't been able to keep up with the changes to the game and how to play on an individual level. Like we've seen these individual drop-offs, and this is an area where Ziwu, the young guys, can actually teach, the old dogs new tricks. Like this is how you're like, think with the VP. Remember at the beginning of CSGO, the VP guys, like that core of Neo, Pasha, and Taz, were really, really struggling. And then they brought Bialy and Snacks in, and those young guys, it felt like kind of not only re-energized, but it kind of showed them that you could just be like crazy aggressive. Like this game lends itself to some very aggressive, snappy plays. And that's when you started to see the other VP guys kind of catch up. And I think a similar thing can happen here with this French scene if the older players are going to be open to kind of, you have to break down your preconceived and your pre-built CSGO knowledge and habits. But like if you can get, if you can take that skill that, Apex obviously has and that NBK and Shox and Kenny obviously have, and these young guys can, show them that this is the kind of fights that you need to take these days. This is the kind of fights that the meta is asking for. Then you can get that French scene reignited. But at the moment, it feels like, and maybe this is just me building up too much of a story that doesn't actually exist, but it does feel like the French scene is so preoccupied with like finding the king. Like, is it like the NBK theory or is it the Shox theory of how to play the game? And it feels like that battle is being waged within the French scene, but it's not letting any of them succeed outside of it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like it doesn't matter who wins, everybody loses.
Right. Like they're trying to be like, it feels like they're trying to establish their way of thinking about the game is so dominant that they're not actually succeeding in any capacity, whatever.
This video and all of the content on my channel is kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas, Snazore Westerlund, Gardner Wilson, James Harding, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, Travis Greb, Tristan Jones, and as always, a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to take part in an esports discussion with yours truly? Would you like teasers for some of my upcoming content? See who the guests are going to be. Do you want to ask me a question for my monthly video AMA? Perhaps you'd like to suggest a guest you'd like to see in my content or a topic to discuss. Well, if so, then put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.